Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Lighting, and this week we're going to be talking about the next installment of what I consider to be one of the best things to come from DC's The New 52. It's He-Man and the Masters of the Universe number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 2012, we see here on the cover we've got He-Man down at the bottom running towards us, the reader, through a large group of enemy soldiers. And behind him, we see a large depiction of Trapjaw looking menacingly at He-Man. And this is the first of a few complaints I have about this book. I'm not mad about Trapjaw being in this book. I'm not mad about the detail or quality of the cover. It looks pretty cool. What I'm mad about is the fact that there is now literally no suspense at all about what villain He-Man will be facing in this issue. The first issue of this book, which, by the way, if you haven't watched my video on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe number 1, I suggest you do so because this series is a linear narrative. So trying to jump in at one of the later issues is kind of confusing sometimes. But back to the story at hand. There's no suspense whatsoever. The first issue of this book had Beastman in it. However, Beastman was not featured anywhere on the cover. The cover was an image of He-Man holding the Sword of Power above his head and Castle Grayskull behind him. So it was a surprise when you got to the page with Beastman in it. You're like, oh wow, Beastman, cool. That's who He-Man's going to be fighting against. But in this issue, you don't get to experience that because they just, throw Trapjaw right on the front cover. I don't know. I mean, it's just, I wish they had done it a little different. Writers: James Robinson, Keith Griffin. Pencilers: Philip Tan, Howard Porter. Inkers: Roy Jose and Livesey. Colors: Alan Pasalake, I'm very sorry, I know I mispronounced that, and the Ories. Letterer: Carlos M. Manguel. Cover: Tan, Jose, and the Ories. Associated Editor: Christy Quinn. Editor: Ben Abernathy. And oh my god, that is so many people who worked on this book. That's at minimum 12 people who worked on this book. Why on earth would DC need that many people to complete one issue of a comic? I don't get it. Like, Philip Tan didn't even draw the entire interior, and it's only 20 pages. That's shocking to me that there were 2 different pencilers that worked on this book. But whatever, man. I mean, I guess that's the way they do business over at DC. They got money to burn, apparently, with Warner Brothers backing them. Here on the inside, on the inside cover, we see an advertisement for Midtown Comics. I've never been to Midtown Comics, and I've also never been to New York City. I'm sure it's a cool store. It looks cool from the pictures I've seen. If you've ever been there and had a good experience or a negative one, feel free to talk about it in the comments section. I'd love to hear about it. We then move to the first page where we see a speech bubble of Beastman explaining how he was defeated by Adam. And this is the next one of the issues that I kind of have with this particular issue of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. This is a very unique and stylistic depiction of Castle Grayskull, which is where Skeletor is now residing. And I wouldn't have a problem with that were it not for the fact that in the last issue, Castle Grayskull was clearly depicted in its classic form that we're all very familiar with. This page in particular was not drawn by Philip Tan, it was drawn by Howard Porter. And I understand the idea of artistic license. I do. However, when you're talking about a continuous narrative and creating continuity from one issue to the next, it's hard to justify completely changing the look of not only an iconic building, but an iconic building that is central to the overall plot of this story from one issue to the next. And by the way, it's not going to maintain this look either. It's going to change back to the classic look of Castle Grayskull that we're all familiar with, that has been the classic look of Castle Grayskull for 40 plus years at this point. And at a certain point, the editors for this book should have stepped in and made sure that the artists were on the same page and that we didn't have a completely different Castle Grayskull depiction for literally like one issue that was going to change back in the very next issue. It really bugs me that that was not, planned out a little bit better before they, started drawing and before this book went to print. Inside of the castle, we see Beastman groveling at Skeletor's feet as he apologizes for not being able to defeat Adam and prevent him from leaving the woods where he was, I guess, imprisoned isn't really the right word. It's where Skeletor wanted him to be. As we see Skeletor standing over Beastman and basically just berate him for making excuses, as we see him then pick up an apple and take a page out of Darth Vader's handbook where he uses his magic to choke Beastman from across the room and continue to calmly explain that Beastman had one job, and that was to kill Adam if he ever tried to leave the parameters of where Skeletor wanted him, and ask why he was incapable of doing that. However, Beastman is panicking as he can't breathe and begs Skeletor to let him go, which Skeletor finally does as he throws the apple that he was eating on the floor and opens the doors out to the rest of Castle Grayskull. However, this does kind of beg the question that rather than put Adam in some sort of a confined space that you didn't want him to get out of, would it not have been just easier to kill him to begin with if you had the opportunity, rather than leave one of your least intelligent flunkies in charge of making sure that Adam was to die if he ever tried to leave the forest? It just seems like bad planning on the part of Skeletor. Also, I'm not certain why this black border of a panel exists right here when it doesn't really need to. We see two other panels that are clearly outlined that are over top of what would otherwise be a full page splash image. This outline serves no purpose and has no reason to exist, so I'm not certain if it's there on purpose or if this was an editing mistake. We then see Beastman fall down to his knees, groveling at the feet of Skeletor, thanking him and praising him for not ending his life. Skeletor then enters back into Castle Grayskull, lost in his own thoughts, as he bumps past one of the servant girls, who gasps. He then grabs her by the neck and lifts her off the ground in a fit of anger, asking her why all of his minions are incapable of performing even the simplest of tasks, despite the fact that Adam has no memory and the rest of them, I'm guessing he means the rest of the Masters of the Universe, have no memories, and that they are his to do as he sees fit with. He then exclaims that he has the power now and forever, and that everyone, friend and foe alike, would do well to remember that. I guess this is the explanation as to why Adam has not been killed along with the other Masters of the Universe. Apparently, Skeletor wants to keep them around as his playthings, speaking, I guess, to his egotistical side and the fact that he wants to revel in the fact that he's defeated them and is now assumedly the ruler of Eternia. We also see that the servant girl has now, I guess, been turned to stone is what is being conveyed here. It's not really, explained, but she's clearly a grayish color on the ground, so maybe. On the next page, we then see an advertisement for Doctor Who. I'm not really a big Doctor Who fan for the same reason that I'm not really a fan of most mainstream comics, and it's the fact that I really feel like the story kind of just exists for the sake of existing. And Doctor Who fans might disagree with me, and if you do, that's okay. It's just my personal opinion. I just kind of feel like for as long as Doctor Who has been running, overall, in the long run, most of the story points kind of end up not mattering as a result. Uh, you know, because of Doctor Who existing in, I guess, what you would call a multiverse or a multi-dimensional type of setting, it's gives the writers the ability to essentially just kind of write themselves out of any corner they might be in by just being like, oh, multiverse, and we can do this and that, and it's fine. Again, if you enjoy it, that's cool, but it's just not really my cup of tea, and I don't really I don't really get into that kind of storytelling as a whole. It's nothing in particular about Doctor Who. It's more or less just I would like my story to have, very concrete, clearly set in stone parameters that a universe has to exist within, more so than just anything can happen because that's what we need to happen for this story to be able to be resolved and give us the ability to move on to the next story arc. On the next page, we switch back to Philip Tan as the penciler as we see Adam wandering through the desert with the Falcon Zor following behind him. The Falcon then lands down at his side as Adam tries to kind of figure out why he feels like he knows this desert and that he's been here before, but can't seem to really put his finger on it, and wishes that Zor could talk so that perhaps the Falcon could explain to him what was going on. He then looks off in the distance and sees a large dust cloud as he realizes that there are others approaching him. He then bends down at a cactus, cuts a piece off, and squeezes some water out of it, trying to quench his thirst. As we see three somewhat nefarious-looking individuals ride up on a large lizard-type creature, and he asks them if they can potentially point him to some sort of an oasis or something, as he is ill-prepared for his trek through the desert and is running short on water. On the next page, we see an advertisement for some statues from the series before Watchmen. They all look pretty cool. If you enjoy Watchmen, I could see you wanting to maybe purchase some of these. Even if you didn't think that Before Watchmen was that good of a series, these are still pretty cool figures, or I guess statues. Then we see Adam is still wondering if the riders can potentially help him in any way. However, they recognize him, and one of them pulls out a small blowgun and hits Adam in the neck with a dart. This, of course, knocks him unconscious immediately, as the dart probably contains some sort of sedative, we're led to believe. And then they dismount and begin to tie him up with ropes as they speak about bringing him back to their camp, to their leader. We then see here on the next page an advertisement for Batman from the New 52 and the beginning of the Death of the Family story arc. This comes on the heels of the Court of Owls story arc, which was actually pretty good. However, in my opinion, the Death of the Family story arc was awful. Spoiler alert right up front. I'm going to tell you what happens here, and honestly, I feel like I'm doing you a favor so that you don't waste your time reading this story arc. The short version is basically Bruce Wayne betrays the trust of the rest of the Bat family members in his bid to defeat the Joker, and the rest of them just feel that they can't trust him in the way that they used to, and that's it. That's the death of the family. No one actually dies. It's just that the rest of the Bat family members no longer trust Bruce the way that they did before the events of this story arc. It was a lot of issues building to something that had a really weak payoff. And basically after that story arc ended, I lost all interest in this book. And despite the fact that Greg Capullo was penciling it, and he's one of my very favorite artists, I stopped subbing to this book altogether because I just felt like the story didn't have any real teeth to it. And one of the things that really bugged me was that I believe it was the very last issue of the Death of the Family story arc, or maybe the second to last issue. They were really trying to push that you bought literally every Bat title that they were putting out to get the full story of the Death of the Family story arc. So, I'm talking, you needed to buy Batman, you needed to buy Batman and Robin, Red Hood and the Outlaws, Nightwing, Batwoman. In fact, in that issue, there's a 2-hour time gap that is referenced. And in order to find out what happens in that time gap, you had to buy that month's Batwoman in order to get that part of the story. And when I read that, I can honestly say I've never been more infuriated reading a comic book at any point in my life than I was at that point. Simply because it felt like such a shameless money grab of like, oh, you want to know what happened in this specific part when Batman had to go to this other part of Gotham? Well, you better go buy another book from us and give us another $3. And I'm just like, yo, man, I'm out. You're kind of showing your true colors here, DC. However, getting back into the He-Man story that we're talking about today, we can see here that the Desert Riders have taken Adam to a oasis and thrown him at the feet of their leader. He is now bound in some sort of technological metal restraints, as we see their leader sitting here on a throne with his face covered, saying that he's happy to have now captured Adam in service to Adam's uncle. Looking up at the chieftain from his knees, Adam then asks if he would please tell him the name of his uncle, as he can't remember it. The man tells him that his uncle's name is Skeletor, and then says that hearing his name must bring about some sort of strong feelings. However, Adam exclaims that he doesn't know that name. The man then tells him that of course he doesn't know that name because it is Skeletor's will that he would die never knowing that name. And he then says to excuse his poor manners and introduces himself to Adam as Cronus, also called Trapjaw, thanks to Adam, as he rips off his cloak, revealing that it is in fact Trapjaw. Again, this would have been a much cooler scene had we not known that Trapjaw was going to be in this comic from the cover. It begs the question, why is his identity even hidden at all? Adam has no memory of him. This would have been perfect as a setup for a big reveal of like, holy crap, it's Trapjaw. But we don't get that because they gave away, the twist, I guess is how you'd call it, on the cover. Thanks a lot, DC. Way to build suspense. He then yells out for his soldiers to throw Adam into a pen. Adam asks why he's doing it, and Trapjaw tells him that because not doing so would be to incur the wrath of Skeletor, and tells Adam to sleep well because tomorrow he will be petitioning for his life. Later that night, we see a woman walking through the darkness as she approaches the man who has been tasked with guarding Adam in a cage. He asks what her business is, and she tells him that Trapjaw wants water brought to the man so that he will be in, top form when he petitions for his life. Adam looks at the woman and says that he doesn't believe that's the case, as it doesn't seem as though Trapjaw really cares about the well-being of any of his prisoners. She informs him that he's correct and that she's actually here because she wanted to speak with him. He asks her name. She tells him that it is in fact Tila, as she gives him more water and tells him to be quiet so that their cover is not blown. And he wonders what exactly she's trying to get at, and she starts to explain, but they are very quickly interrupted by the guard. On the next page, we see an advertisement for a comic book to go along with World of Warcraft called Pearl of Pandaria. I have to admit, the only real knowledge I have of Warcraft is from playing Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness. And my knowledge of World of Warcraft is pretty limited. I enjoyed Warcraft 2 quite a bit. It was a really fun game when it came out. But I just kind of, fell off from it, and MMOs aren't really my cup of tea, so I never really got involved in World of Warcraft. But It always seemed like a lot of the stories and events they had going on were pretty cool. If you know anything about Pearl of Pandaria or you read it and, have any insight about it, I'd love to know about it, and, feel free to leave any information you have in the comments below. We then see that Tila tries to talk with Adam some more. Unfortunately, she is dragged off before their conversation can continue, as the guard tells her that no one could possibly need to drink that much, as he shoos her away and tells her to go back about her duties. Adam tries to get some sleep as he curses the fact that the guard is, for once actually, competent and cares about his duties, unlike the fumbling idiots that he's used to dealing with. But then realizes that he's never dealt with anyone like this before or been pent up in a cage, at least not to his knowledge. And he doesn't understand why he has memories that don't make sense and why he's recalling things that don't seem to have happened in his past. On the next page, we see an advertisement for the Green Lantern Corps Volume 1 trade paper. I got to admit, I didn't read any of the Green Lantern Corps from the New 52, though I will say one of the things I really kicked myself for not purchasing when it was being printed was the Red Lantern Corps from the New 52. I really like the Red Lanterns, and I especially like Atrocitus as a character. I think he's got a really cool backstory, and I feel like he's a really intriguing character. So, despite the fact that I know that the New 52 winds up basically going nowhere in the end, I'd still like to at some point find a way to get the entirety of the Red Lantern Corps from New 52, just to be able to read all those stories and, get some more, I guess, stories featuring Atrocitus and the goings on of the Red Lantern Corps in the DC universe, even if it doesn't really amount to anything in the end. We then see the next day that Adam is once again in front of Trapjaw, as Trapjaw explains to him that he will have to individually petition the warriors surrounding him one by one for them to spare his life, and if they decline, he will then have to fight them for his life. Adam asks what will happen to him if he decides not to kill each one of these guards individually, and Trapjaw informs him that he will then have to die as he hurls Adam's woodsman's axe directly at his head. However, Adam is able to react fast enough to duck under the axe as it flies over his head and lodges in the skull of this individual who is wearing a helmet, which means that either his helmet was absolute garbage, Adam had the world's most incredibly powerful woodcutting axe, or Trapjaw is just so strong himself that he was able to use a woodcutting axe to penetrate through this metal helmet. Either way, Adam sees that the man is then falling after he's died as he uses the opening to run forward and grab the man's sword out of his hand. He then immediately questions why he grabbed the sword instead of his woodcutting axe, as he has no idea how to use a sword and would have been better served to grab a weapon he was actually skilled with. He realizes that he's completely outnumbered and decides to take the opportunity to run through the opening left by the man who died as he skirts through the rest of the caravan, trying to evade the men who are now chasing after him. Unfortunately, he doesn't know the layout of the land and is cut off at an intersection and is once again surrounded. However, he's surprised to realize that he is actually skilled at using the sword, as we see him grab one of the men in a headlock while kicking the other one in the face, really holding his own against a large group of enemies who are trying to kill him. We then get a 2-page splash image of a memoriam to Joe Kubert, who I had forgotten passed away in 2012. Joe Kubert doesn't get mentioned as frequently as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby do, but honestly, I really feel like he kind of should. His presence in the industry was, I would say, as instrumental as theirs in really shaping what the comic book industry would wind up becoming in the long run. And I really feel like it's kind of a shame that his name doesn't get mentioned as much as theirs, when I really feel like he was just as important to comic books as they were. Back in the action, we see that Adam continues to fight as he starts to slash but is blocked with a spear. He then gets on top of a building and jumps from one rooftop to another as the soldiers continue to follow him and, bring about an end to his life, as we see he's cornered as a large group of soldiers is very quickly bearing down on him. And then suddenly Adam is thrown off balance by what he believes to be an earthquake, when in actuality, it's just Trapjaw picking up the entire building with one hand and throwing it aside, which I guess would explain how he was able to get a woodcutting axe to slam all the way through a steel helmet, as he's just that strong. We then see that he tells the rest of the soldiers to back off as he's going to kill Adam himself. And then this weird little lizard thing is on his arm out of nowhere. And we see here that, despite not having the cybernetic arm that we're used to seeing him drawn with, this creature, I guess, somehow turns his hand into a scythe blade using magic or technology or both. It's not explained at all. This is the only point we see this little creature. It's not explicitly stated what this creature does or why it's there, or how Trapjaw's hand turns into a scythe blade with all this energy around it as he takes a swipe, and Adam is able to block it quickly with his sword and, stands at the ready trying to figure out how he's going to defeat this new opponent. On the next page, we get an advertisement for Batman Detective Comics. I can't remember if Batman Detective Comics was part of the greater Bat story in terms of tying into Batman and the rest of the Bat family books, but I don't recall if it was any good. I never read it. I don't remember talking to anybody who did. It seemed like one of those books that didn't get necessarily the same kind of love that the rest of the Bat stories did. But if you enjoyed it and read it, I'd like to know more about it, just to know if it actually was part of that story, or if it was its own standalone title that just kind of dealt with Batman's own solo adventures. We then see on the next page that Trapjaw wastes no time in pressing his attack and very quickly begins to overwhelm Adam and outclass him, as Adam wonders why all of a sudden his quote-unquote fancy sword skills are no longer aiding him, as we see Trapjaw standing over Adam and exclaim that he's about to end Adam's life. Oddly enough, it's kind of weird how this scythe blade, the long, tall part of it faces back towards Trapjaw, whereas the short end of the blade is what he attacks with. It kind of doesn't make any sense from a mechanics standpoint, or, any standpoint of reasonable fighting skill, but whatever. That's just how his blade comes out, I guess. However, he is then distracted when a large rumbling starts to come up at him from behind, and he exclaims that this can't be happening when he's so close to finally defeating his foe. We then see that the rumbling was caused by a stampede of all of the large reptile mounts that Trapjaw and his soldiers ride upon, and that they were let from their pen apparently by Tila, who is riding one of them, as she reaches down to grab Adam's hand and pull him out of danger. She throws him onto the back of the lizard that she's riding on and tells him that when they get to safety, the two of them are going to have a lot to talk about. We then see later on in the evening that the camp is in ruins, as we see Skeletor walking alongside of Trapjaw as they survey all of the damages and the dead. And as they get further into the camp, Skeletor turns back to Trapjaw and asks him, "Why didn't you just slit his throat?" Which is a question that Trapjaw could just as easily ask to Skeletor, because had Skeletor just killed Adam to begin with, none of this would have happened. Once again, kind of illustrating a little bit of a plot hole in the sense that Skeletor assumedly had the ability to kill Adam and the rest of the Masters of the Universe and didn't, because he wanted to make them his playthings to stroke his own ego, and is now blaming what is ultimately his own failures on his henchmen. Also, I should point out that this page, page number 19, is drawn by Howard Porter, not Philip Tan. You can tell, because despite the fact that they have a similar art style, Howard has instead decided to draw Trapjaw with a fully cybernetic arm, which he did not have for the entire rest of this book, which once again goes back to the point I made earlier in this video that if you have two separate artists on a book, they need to be in communication with each other to prevent these type of continuity errors. You know, making Castle Grayskull look different from one issue to the next is one thing. To literally change a complete appendage of one of the main characters of the book from one page to the next makes absolutely no sense at all. We can see that right here, Trapjaw does not have a cybernetic arm. He simply has a blade that he has turned his hand into. The rest of his arm is completely organic, whereas now his arm is fully cybernetic from the shoulder all the way down past the elbow to where it then turns into a hook. I understand that Howard was probably looking at, reference images or thinking back to the way that Trapjaw has always looked with a cybernetic arm, which I actually like better than the biological arm. However, if he was drawn with a fully organic biological arm from the beginning of the book, then you don't suddenly change it to a fully cybernetic arm at the end of the book for one page, because Howard was drawing pages 1 through 4 and then for some reason page 19, which doesn't make any sense, but that's apparently the way DC was doing business at the time. On the next page, we see an advertisement for Aquaman Volume 1, The Trench. I did not subscribe to this book, but if I remember correctly, I want to say this story arc revolved around a war between the Atlanteans and a race of fish people that lived in the Mariana Trench. I could be wrong about that. If I am, I'm sorry. If you know anything about this story, feel free to post about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about it, because I do remember being a little bit intrigued about this one, even though I'm not like a huge Aquaman fan. I thought this story seemed kind of cool. We then see that Adam and Teela have reached a spot they consider to be safe as they have dismounted and continue to converse amongst themselves. Adam tells Teela that he's a little perturbed with her because the stampede that she caused could have injured him. She, however, basically tells him that he's being a baby about it, considering that her options were really limited and she did, in fact, save his life. And honestly, she's kind of right. He is kind of being a little bit immature about the fact that while he was in danger from the stampede, he was in just as much danger of being killed by Trapjaw. So, pick your poison, Adam. She looks at him and he interrupts her, telling her or asking her why she called him Adam, as he never once told her his name. She replies saying that she somehow just knew that's what his name was, despite the fact that they've never met. They're then interrupted as the Falcon Zor lands on Adam's shoulder. She asks what this is about. He explains that this is Zor, his falcon, and that Zor has been the one who has been leading him from his home on his journey. And Teela then says that, when she stated that she and Adam had a lot to talk about, that this is one of the things that they need to talk about, because Zor is not a bird at all. And that's the final page of the story of this book, as we see the next issue is called Blood Tide. Here on the next page, we get a release schedule for all of the number zeros of all of the new 52 books that are coming out. Again, this number 0 thing got popular in the 90s, and apparently DC tried to resurrect it here in the mid-2000s. And honestly, it just kind of feels like a shameless money grab, but it's supposed to give backstories to all of the different characters. As we see here on the next page, there's an advertisement for Superman, or it says, who's in the New 52? What it is the New 52 was supposed to be a complete reset of the DC universe, top to bottom. So that's why we see here Superman's first appearance is listed as Justice League number 1, 2011. And it gives a little bit of rundown of his powers and gives a little bit of backstory to his character. They didn't change things a ton, but it was slightly different. So I guess they kind of felt the need of like, hey, all of these characters and stories need a new backstory because we're starting from square one, even though the New 52 was going to be done in a few years after this. This was after the New 52 would have been 1 year in at this point. But, kudos to them for trying to start something new. But, a lot of criticism comes to the fact that they totally jumped ship on the whole thing after a couple of years. On the next page, we get an advertisement for DC All Access, where it talks about getting all of the New 52 number 0 comics, basically just trying to push people into buying these number zeros. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for 5 Gum. If you remember, when I was going through the first issue of this book, there was an advertisement for 5 Gum in that one, and I questioned whether or not 5 Gum still existed. As it turns out, it does, and I've still never tried it, because, once again, it seems like a completely unnecessary product. I was never disappointed with Double Mint or Wrigley Spearmint Gum or Juicy Fruit. I have no desire to try some weirdly packaged gum that had super strange advertisements pushing it on me from over 10 years ago. And that was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe number 2. And I know I went on a lot of rants during this video, and it may seem like I don't like this book, but nothing could be further from the truth. I like this book a lot. I really think they did a good job with the story. I just feel like there were a lot of points in this book that didn't make sense and were done for reasons that I can't get my head around. Why would you put Trapjaw right on the front cover when you could have had a really cool reveal in the middle of this book? Why did you get a second artist to come in to draw 5 pages of the book and not even be like 5 sequential pages? It's 4 sequential pages and then 1 page right at the end of the book. Why didn't you make sure that these artists were both on the same page as to the way things should look? Why did you not, do your job as an editor and sit everyone down and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Hey, make sure that your drawings make sense. Hey, make sure that the continuity is correct. And don't suddenly give one of the characters a cybernetic arm for 1 page that he didn't have throughout the rest of the book. But again, these are just my opinions. Maybe you didn't think that they did anything wrong, but I sure as heck did, despite the fact that the overall story is really good. But, those are my opinions. You're entitled to your own. If we don't share the same opinion, it's okay. We can live with each other and coexist in harmony. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.